Okay, let's dive into something really specific and quite interesting today. We've got some source material here. It's excerpts from an article, and it's exploring a particular route, a pathway to legal residency in the EU.
Right. And the focus is really sharp on this one. The Greece Golden Visa, specifically that $250,000 option, and how it's looking for 2025 based on this source.
Yeah, and our mission, I guess, for this deep dive is to really unpack what this source material is saying, why it might matter to you, the listener, and, get into the nitty-gritty details the article lays out for next year.
Exactly. And the source itself, it definitely tries to grab your attention.
It really does. It calls this the potential smartest legal shortcut, which is quite a
Well,
claim, and even frames it as an insurance policy. I mean, that's pretty strong language.
it is. So maybe we should start with the basics. According to this source, what is this Greece Golden Visa fundamentally?
Good starting point.
Well, at its heart, based on what we're reading here, it's a residency permit. It's set up for non-EU nationals, and the way you get it is through investing in Greek property.
Okay, investing in property. And the specific level we're focusing on from this article is that number.
Exactly. The minimum investment the source talks about is 250,000 euros, specifically into real estate.
Right, 250K. Quarter of a million euros. Into property. Got it. And once someone gets this permit, how long is it good for? What does the source say about validity?
Okay, so initially it's valid for 5 years, and crucially, the source points out it's renewable. So it's not just a one-off 5-year thing.
5 years renewable.
Uh,
Okay, so why does the source seem to think this 250K path is such a big deal? What are the sort of key benefits it's listing?
Well, there are quite a few points the article really emphasizes. The immediate big one is simply getting legal EU residency with that $250,000 investment.
Just having that status.
Right, and a really significant detail here, which the source definitely flags, is that you don't actually have to live or work in Greece initially to get this visa or even to keep it.
That no stay requirement bit, that's probably a huge factor for a lot of people, isn't it?
Absolutely. Another major benefit the source highlights is free Schengen access. So that opens up visa-free travel across, 27 European countries now?
Yeah, think about the hassle that avoids if you travel to Europe often,
Mm.
just skipping the visa application.
Huge for mobility, definitely. And it's linked to something tangible. You actually, own something.
Right.
Yes, it gives you the opportunity to own real estate in Europe. The source kind of frames this not just as owning bricks and mortar, but maybe securing a physical base or, like you mentioned, potentially a backup plan.
A backup plan.
Yeah.
And speaking of plans, does this extend to family members?
This is presented as one of maybe the most significant benefits, actually. The source explicitly says the visa covers your spouse, your children under 21, and even your parents and your in-laws.
Wait, parents and in-laws?
Yes. It uses the phrase that 3 generations can be included under just one investment.
3 generations. Wow. Okay, that's a really broad definition of family for a visa program like this.
It certainly is, and the source definitely underscores that point.
So how does that 250K figure, stack up within the EU at least, based on what the source says? Does it compare well?
Well, the source makes a point of saying that $250,000 is presented as the lowest investment threshold currently available in the EU for this kind of residency by investment. It compares it to examples like Spain or Portugal, which it says often start at 500,000 or even more.
Okay, so it positions it as, let's say, relatively more accessible compared to some other big names.
That's the angle, yes. More accessible financially.
And you mentioned the no stay requirement earlier. Just to be absolutely clear on that, the source says you don't need to physically live in Greece to keep the residency status.
Correct. The source is quite clear. You maintain your visa status, your residency, even if you're not actually living there day to day.
Interesting. What about other opportunities that come with being an EU resident? Does the source mention things like, say, education or business?
Yes, it does. It connects the residency to unlocking EU education possibilities for children, so potentially easier access to European schools or universities.
Hmm.
And it also mentions business freedom. Things like the ability to potentially open companies, make investments, maybe expand your business reach within that EU single market.
Okay, so it's not just about travel and having a property. It sounds like it could open doors in other areas within Europe, too.
That's how it's presented.
So when you put all these things together, the relatively lower investment compared to others, the free travel, the super broad family inclusion, no need to actually live there, plus the potential business and education angles, it starts to make sense why the source uses such strong terms.
Exactly. That quote you mentioned earlier about it being an insurance policy for your life, wealth, and future, it really sums up how the source is trying to frame the whole value proposition here. It's pitched as more than just a travel document. It's a strategic asset.
Okay, let's get into the real nuts and bolts of that 250,000 investment itself, especially thinking about 2025. Because the source suggests you can't just buy any old 250K apartment anywhere anymore, right? What are the specific options it says are still valid at that price point for 2025?
Right, that's a key clarification in the source material. While the minimum amount is still 250,000 K's in property value, the types of property or maybe the locations that qualify at this tier, well, they have specific criteria for 2025. The article outlines 3 distinct ways to still qualify at this level.
Okay, 3 specific paths for that 250K. Can you lay those out for us?
Sure. So option 1 described is to convert commercial property to residential. So this means you'd buy, say, an office space or maybe an old shop, something zoned commercial, and then you go through the process to legally change its use to residential apartments.
Okay.
And then you could rent those out or just hold on to them. But
Yeah.
the source implies, there's work involved in that change of use.
Right, repurposing commercial space. That sounds like it involves a bit more legwork than just, buying a ready-to-go apartment.
It definitely suggests that, yeah. It's a different kind of project. Okay, option 2 is to restore a historic building. So here, you'd buy a property that's officially designated as preserved or listed, maybe a heritage building. And then you have to undertake renovations, but they have to follow specific approved plans. The source mentions these are often found in older, maybe more characterful neighborhoods.
Restoring a historic building?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. That adds another whole layer of complexity, I'd imagine. Maybe needing specialized architects or planners.
Absolutely. It's presented as, not your standard off-the-shelf purchase. And the third option mentioned involves buying multiple small properties. Here, you can combine the value of 2 separate, smaller units to reach the 250K.
Okay, 2 smaller places.
Yes, but the source says each unit must be valued at $130,000 or more on its own. And crucially, they have to be located in specific qualifying zones that the government designates. So you can't just combine any 2 cheap properties anywhere.
Right, combining 2 units, but each has to hit that 130K minimum, and only in certain zones. So it sounds like, unlike maybe in the past where 250K could get you a standard apartment in many places, these 2025 options at this specific tier are focused on, well, more complex or perhaps geographically restricted investment types.
That seems to be the nuance the source is highlighting about the 2025 rules for this 250K level. It's not just hitting the number, it's how and where you invest it. And the source actually makes a specific point here, saying something like, you don't need to be rich, you need to be smart.
Smart, meaning you need to understand these very specific pathways, the conversions, restorations, or zoned multi-property options.
Exactly. Smart about choosing which of these routes fits and then how to actually execute it properly.
So how does someone actually, navigate this, especially with these potentially more involved investment types? What are the steps the source lays out for the process?
Okay, the article breaks it down into 5 main steps. Step 1 is choose your strategy. Basically deciding which of those specific 250K options aligns with what you want. Is it purely passive? Do you want rental income? Is it mainly for personal use down the line?
Makes sense. Strategy first.
And the source does mention that there are services out there that can help with this decision-making. It even suggests booking a free consultation, referencing a specific provider it names later on.
Okay, so figure out your path. What comes next?
Step 2 is the legal preparation. This is all the paperwork stuff, getting your documents translated and certified, obtaining a Greek tax number, and really importantly, setting up a power of attorney, a POA.
Power of attorney, right.
And the source really emphasizes the remote possibility here. It states quite directly, you stay home, we work in Greece, which suggests a lot can be handled by your legal reps.
That's quite a statement. So it sounds like a good chunk of this, maybe even most of it, can be done without you having to physically be in Greece at that stage.
That's certainly the capability the source highlights, yeah.
Right.
Then step 3 is actually buying the property. Once the legal groundwork is done, especially with that POA in place, the funds get transferred usually to a secure notary account, it says. And the source notes that the actual property purchase contract can be signed and the deed registered, all by your legal representative in Greece. Again, really underlining that remote possibility.
So even the property deal itself might not require you flying over. Okay, property secured, then what?
Step 4, apply for the residency itself. This is where you, or perhaps your representative again, submits the formal application. This includes things like your biometric data fingerprints, photo plus proof you now own the property, have health insurance, that sort of
It's
thing.
the official application. Does it say how long that part takes?
Yes, it gives a pretty clear estimate for the processing time at this stage. It says your permit application is typically processed within 60 to 90 days.
60 to 90 days. So a couple of months, maybe 3, for the government processing once everything's submitted. That sounds reasonably efficient, actually.
It's presented that way, yes.
Yeah.
And then the final step, step 5, receive your 5-year visa. This is when you actually collect your physical residence card. And according to the source, this is the point. You fully gain all those benefits we talked about, the EU access, the property rights, the family security.
Like the actual card in hand.
Yeah.
And does the source give an overall time frame for this whole journey, from maybe the first call to getting that card?
It does. It estimates the average overall timeline from, say, deciding to go ahead to actually receiving the Visa card is typically around 2 to 3 months.
2 to 3 months start to finish,
Hmm.
potentially. That's presented as a relatively quick turnaround for getting residency cards for the whole family.
Seems quite fast, yeah.
Okay, so beyond the official paperwork and the card itself, what does the source say you genuinely gain from this? You know, the less tangible stuff, but maybe the more significant benefits in the long run.
Well, it talks quite a bit about securing a plan B, for uncertain times, having an alternative residency.
Yeah.
It mentions having an EU base that you could potentially leverage for business expansion later, or maybe setting up educational pathways for your kids.
Right, so it's an asset, but also kind of a strategic foothold in Europe.
Precisely. And the property itself, of course, is an asset, something you own outright. The source notes, you can sell it later, you could rent it out for income, or you could eventually pass it down to your heirs.
Owning a European asset.
And it really puts a lot of emphasis on the Schengen mobility aspect, framing it as Schengen access without the usual red tape.
Yeah.
It uses phrases like no embassy queues, no visa worries, just rights.
Yeah, that ease of travel across those 27 countries, just being able to hop on a plane without visa applications,
Yeah.
that's a major practical plus.
Definitely. And finally, it mentions gaining a certain reputation and legal credibility just by holding that official EU resident status.
Okay. Who is this actually for, though? What are the basic eligibility criteria the source lays out? Who can apply?
The general criteria mentioned are pretty broad, actually. You need to be a non-EU citizen, obviously. You need to have a clean criminal record, be over 18 years old. And critically, you have to be able to prove the source of the funds you're using for the investment. They want to see it's legitimate money.
Okay, so non-EU, clean record, adult, and proof of funds. Seems straightforward enough.
And that family inclusion part, again, just to be crystal clear on exactly which relatives are covered. Yes, the source lists them very specifically. Your spouse, your children under 21, and both your parents and your spouse's parents, so in-laws.
Parents and in-laws. Got it.
And it really hammers home that point. 3 generations can move under one investment, which, as you said, really sets it apart from many other programs.
Yeah, that 3-generation coverage is a powerful draw for family-oriented planning. Okay, let's switch gears slightly.
Yeah.
What about the financial side after you've made the investment? Does the source talk about things like taxes or potential profits?
It does touch on that. It mentions the potential for rental returns, especially if you choose one of the income-generating property options, like maybe converting that commercial space into apartments. It estimates these returns could be around 4 to 7% annually in many city areas.
4 to 7%.
Yeah.
Which could potentially help offset costs or make the investment partially self-sustaining over time.
Potentially, yes. It also makes a point of highlighting that Greece apparently has 0 capital controls, which basically means, according to the source, you have the freedom to move your profits from the investment out of Greece if you want to, without government restrictions blocking you.
Okay, freedom to repatriate profits. That's important for investors. Any other tax points?
It specifically notes there's no wealth tax levied on the property itself, at least for non-residents holding the golden visa.
No wealth tax on the property for non-residents. That's a good specific detail for potential investors to know. Now, here's a big question people always ask about these programs. Does this path eventually lead to citizenship, Greek citizenship?
Right, and this is where the source is quite careful to draw a distinction. It says there is a path to dual citizenship, which Greece allows. However, it's only possible after 7 years, and critically, that path requires you to have been physically living in Greece during that 7-year period and meet integration requirements.
Ah, okay, that's a crucial difference. So the 5-year residency permit, the Golden Visa itself, doesn't require you to live there. But if you want citizenship down the line, that requires 7 years of actual physical presence and integration, like language tests, etc. They're two separate things.
Exactly. The source makes that distinction clear. The residency gives you the EU access and rights without the living requirement, but citizenship is a different commitment, requiring you to actually make Greece your home for a significant period.
Got it. Okay, the source material also seems to anticipate some common questions people might have. It almost has like a little FAQ section built in. What are some of those questions and the answers it provides?
Yeah, it addresses several key points. One is that remote process question. Can I really do everything remotely? And the source says yes, 100% possible if you use a legal team with a power of attorney.
Okay, confirms what we discussed about the steps. Another one is that 250K option definitely still valid in 2025.
Yes, according to the source, it is still valid, but specifically for those routes we talked about, the commercial to residential conversions, the historic building restorations, and buying those combined smaller properties in the designated zones, not for just any 250K property anymore.
Right, only those specific pathways. What about partners? Can you include an unmarried partner on the application?
The source says no on that one. An unmarried partner can only be included if you are legally married or if you have a registered civil union that's recognized under Greek law. Otherwise, just being partners isn't enough.
Okay, clear legal definition needed there. What about taxes if you do rent out the property? Will you pay high taxes on that rental income?
The source gives a figure. It
Yeah.
says the income tax on rentals starts at 15%, but it also mentions you can deduct legitimate expenses related to the property.
15% starting rate with deductions. Seems fairly standard. Can you sell the property later? Can you exit the investment?
Yes, you can sell the property, typically after the initial 5-year visa period is up. However, the source is clear. If you sell the qualifying property, you generally lose the golden visa unless you immediately reinvest the funds into another qualifying property.
Ah, okay. So the residency remains tied to holding a qualifying investment. You can't just sell up and keep the visa.
That's the gist of it, yes. It's tied to the investment.
Can you finance the property purchase? Get a mortgage in Greece for it?
No. The source states quite clearly that the $250,000 or more investment must come from the applicant's own funds. It cannot be financed through a loan or mortgage.
Right. Has to be your own capital. What about the kids included on the visa? What happens if one of them turns 21 during the 5-year validity? Do they get kicked off?
Not necessarily kicked off immediately, but their dependent status under the main visa ends. The source says they can then apply for a different kind of visa on their own merit, like perhaps a student visa if they're studying, or a work visa if they find a job, or potentially if they have the means, they could even transition to their own golden visa investment.
Okay, so there are potential pathways for them to stay in Europe legally after they age out of the family visa.
Yes, options exist, but they need to take action.
What if you start with a 250K investment, but later decide you want to invest more, maybe move to one of the higher tiers like the 800K zone that exists in some areas? Can you upgrade?
Yes, the source says that's possible. You can sell your initial 250K qualifying property and then reinvest at any tier, including the higher ones, if your circumstances or goals change down the line.
So there's flexibility to move between tiers later.
Seems so.
And the citizenship question, again, just to be absolutely sure, does this definitively lead to citizenship?
The source reiterates the point we covered. Yes, it can lead to citizenship, but only after 7 years of actual, legal, physical residency in Greece, plus meeting integration requirements like language and civic knowledge. It's not automatic with the golden visa.
Right, highlighting that crucial physical presence condition again. Okay, one last important question it addresses. What happens if the main investor, the person who made the 250K investment, passes away? Does the whole family lose their residency status?
That's a critical point for long-term security. The source says, no, the family doesn't lose the visa in that scenario. It states that the golden visa residency permit is considered inheritable. It can be legally transferred to the main investor's heirs, allowing them to maintain their residency status.
Okay, that's very significant. It means the benefit can potentially continue for the family, even though the original investor is gone.
Exactly. Provides continuity.
The source material also includes some information on, well, how someone might actually get started if they were interested in pursuing this. How does it frame that part?
It points towards the existence of specific services or companies that specialize in this. It actually names one provider, Ayland, and sort of frames their role as being able to Make it simple, make it legal, make it profitable.
So positioning them as facilitators for this whole process.
Yes, especially given the complexities of those specific 2025 investment options, like the conversions or restorations. The source then provides contact details, a website link, an email, a phone number, suggesting ways interested people could explore their options further via that specific service.
Right, so the source isn't just presenting the information abstractly, it's also pointing towards practical resources someone might use to navigate these particular, maybe trickier 2025 pathways.
Exactly. It presents the service as a potential way to actually execute the process it's been describing.
Okay, well, I think we've really gone through the weeds on this one. We've unpacked the specifics of this Greece Golden Visa $250,000 path, specifically as it's presented for 2025 in this source material. We've covered, what it fundamentally is.
The whole basket of benefits the source highlights, especially that very broad three-generation family inclusion and the emphasis on the remote process.
Those specific and maybe somewhat more complex investment options that qualify for $250K in 2025. The conversions, restorations, zoned properties.
The step-by-step process outlined who's eligible, the financial bits like potential returns and taxes, and we addressed a lot of those common questions the source itself raised.
It definitely lays out a potential route for non-EU citizens looking for that EU residency foothold through property investment. But with those clear, specific conditions attached to the $250K level for 2025. Like you said, it's not just any simple purchase at that price point anymore, according to this source.
No, it seems focused on choosing one of those defined routes, the conversion, the restoration, or the specific zoned multi-property approach. Requires a bit more strategic thinking, perhaps.
And the source leaves us with a final, quite potent thought, doesn't it? Something for you, the listener, to mull over after all this detail.
Yeah, it wraps up by saying, with $250K, you don't just buy a property, you unlock a legal future for you and your family.
A legal future. That really ties the financial investment directly to a very significant, potentially life-changing long-term outcome, at least as this source presents it. Thanks for helping walk us through all the details laid out in this article.
Absolutely. Always fascinating to get into the specific mechanics and the framing of these global mobility options. Lots of details to consider.
Indeed. Plenty there for you to think about.